The Texas sun was already punishing by 8 in the morning. The kind of dry, relentless heat that made the asphalt shimmer like a mirage on Highway 90. Bobby Dean Calloway sat on the cracked wooden steps of his front porch in Uvalde, cradling a mug of black coffee that had long gone cold. He hadn't noticed. He rarely noticed things anymore. Not the overgrown lawn, not the peeling paint on the shutters, not the stack of unopened bills on the kitchen table that had been growing since March. He was 53 years old and looked 65. Once, Bobby Dean Calloway had been someone. Not famous, not wealthy, but respected in the way that mattered most in Nashville and San Antonio. Respected by musicians. He had produced 11 albums that charted on the Billboard country charts, had shaken hands with legends, had sat in recording studios where history was made. His name appeared in the liner notes of records that people still pulled out at family gatherings. The kind of music that made grandmothers close their eyes and sway without realizing they were doing it. That was before Claire. He took a sip of the cold coffee and grimaced, setting the mug down on the step beside him. A mockingbird landed on the fence post at the edge of the yard and regarded him with that sideways, judgmental tilt that birds always seem to reserve for people who had stopped trying. Bobby stared back at it. The bird won. His cell phone buzzed against his thigh, and he nearly ignored it. He'd been nearly ignoring everything for 2 years. But something, some residual professional reflex buried beneath all the grief and bourbon, made him glance at the screen. The number was a Nashville area code he didn't recognize. He answered anyway. Bobby Dean Calloway? The voice on the other end was polished, efficient. The voice of someone who made 50 calls before lunch and remembered every one of them. My name is Carla Jo Reeves. I'm calling on behalf of George Strait's management team. Bobby straightened slightly on the steps. The mockingbird flew away. I'm listening, he said, and was mildly surprised to find that he meant it. Carla Jo Reeves had been working for George Strait's management for 6 years, and in that time she had learned 3 things with absolute certainty. George was always on time. George never raised his voice. And when George Strait said he wanted something simple, he meant it in the most profound and demanding way possible. She sat at her desk in the Nashville office, a converted Victorian house on Music Row where the air conditioning worked inconsistently and the coffee was always fresh, and waited while Bobby Dean Calloway processed what she'd just told him. He wants a new original song, she repeated, keeping her voice neutral. Something personal. Intimate. He's been specific about what he doesn't want. No stadium production, no orchestral swells, no lyrics that feel like they were written by committee. He wants something that sounds like a man telling the truth. There was a long pause on the line. Why me? Bobby asked. It wasn't false modesty. It was a genuine question, and Carla Jo appreciated that. She'd spoken to 2 other producers that week, and both of them had spent the first 5 minutes of the call talking about their credentials. Your name came up in conversation, she said carefully. George mentioned an album you produced back in 2009, Red Dirt Road Home for Jimmy Lee Patton. Bobby was quiet again. Carla Jo could hear him breathing, slow and deliberate, like a man who had learned to be careful about how much air he let in. That was a good record, he said finally. George thought so too. He said it was the last album he'd heard that sounded like someone meant every single word. She paused, then added, he doesn't say things like that lightly. No, Bobby agreed. I don't imagine he does. Carla Jo leaned forward over her desk. Outside her window, a delivery truck was idling on the street, and she could hear the faint sound of a radio playing something she didn't recognize. Mr. Calloway, I need to be direct with you. We're not looking for a team of Nashville songwriters sitting in a room for 3 weeks. George has specifically requested a more organic process. small team, real people, real story. He wants to be involved in the development, which is unusual for him. How much time do we have? 6 weeks. Bobby laughed. A short, rusty sound, like a hinge that hadn't been used in a long time. 6 weeks to write a song that George Strait thinks is honest. Is that a yes? Another pause. Longer this time. Carla Jo found herself holding her breath, which was unprofessional, and she straightened in her chair. "I'll need a few people," Bobby said. "People I choose. That's acceptable. And I work from Texas, not Nashville." Carla Jo blinked. That was unconventional. "I'll need to clear that with, 'That's my condition,'" Bobby said. Not rudely, just firmly, in the way of a man who had very few things left that he was willing to negotiate on. "I work from home, or I don't work at all." She cleared it within the hour. George, she was told, had simply nodded and said, "Good. Nashville's gotten too loud anyway." Bobby Dean Calloway spent the rest of that morning sitting at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen that was almost out of ink. He wrote 2 names and stared at them for a long time. The first was Dale Hutchins. Dale was 61 years old and lived 40 minutes outside of Uvalde on a property that was technically a ranch, but functioned more as a retirement home for retired horses and a man who had retired from everything else. Dale had played guitar on 4 of the albums Bobby had produced, including Red Dirt Road Home, and he had a quality that Bobby had never been able to fully articulate to anyone who hadn't heard it in person. When Dale Hutchins played guitar, you believed whatever was being sung. It wasn't technique. It was something older than technique. The problem was that Dale had sworn, publicly and with considerable profanity, that he would never set foot in a recording studio again. That had been after the messy collapse of his last project. A collaboration with a young country pop artist whose label had gutted every authentic element from the record and replaced it with synthesizers and auto-tune. Dale had driven home from Nashville, parked his truck, walked into his kitchen, and told his wife Pauline that he was done. And he had been done. For 4 years. Bobby called him anyway. "No," Dale said, before Bobby had finished explaining. "George Strait," Bobby said. Silence. "You're not playing fair," Dale said. "I'm not playing at all," Bobby replied. "This is real. 6 weeks. Texas. Small team. We write something honest or we don't write anything." Dale was quiet for so long that Bobby thought the call had dropped. "Pauline's going to say I'm a fool," Dale said finally. "What are you going to say?" "I'm going to say she's probably right." A long exhale. "When do you need me?" The second name on Bobby's legal pad was one he had circled 3 times and then crossed out and then circled again. Lena Whitford. He had heard Lena's name from a mutual acquaintance 8 months ago, a sound engineer named Rick, who worked out of San Antonio and had a radar for genuine talent that Bobby had always trusted. Rick had described Lena as the real thing, if she'd just get out of her own way. She was 28, had grown up in Corpus Christi, had studied music at UT Austin, and had written a handful of songs that were quietly remarkable. The kind of songs that other songwriters recognized immediately as serious, but that had never found commercial traction, because Lena, apparently, had a gift for self-sabotage that matched her gift for melody. Bobby had listened to 3 of her demos online. Rick was right. She was the real thing. He found her number through Rick and called her that afternoon. "Mr. Calloway," she said when he introduced himself. Her voice was careful, like someone who had learned to be skeptical of good news. "I know who you are." "Good," Bobby said. "Then I don't have to explain my resume. I'll explain the job instead." When he finished, the line was quiet. "I don't understand why you'd want me," Lena said. There are 100 better-known songwriters you could... I don't want better known, Bobby said. I want better. Another silence. The particular quality of silence that belonged to someone fighting with themselves. Okay, Lena said quietly. Okay, I'll come. Carla Jo Reeves drove to Texas herself. She hadn't planned to. She had planned to coordinate everything by phone and email, flying in only when absolutely necessary, maintaining the professional distance that her role required. But something about the conversation with Bobby Calloway had unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite identify. And she found herself, on a Thursday morning, loading a weekend bag into her car and driving south on I-40 with the windows down and the radio off. She was 34 years old, organized to the point of compulsion, and had spent the last 6 years being excellent at a job that had nothing to do with what she actually loved. She loved music, not the business of music, the music itself, the architecture of songs, the way a single chord change could shift the emotional gravity of an entire room. She had studied music theory in college, had written songs in her apartment in Nashville in the hours after work, had 3 notebooks full of lyrics that no one had ever read. She was very good at keeping things in their proper compartments. As she crossed into Texas, and the landscape opened up into that vast, spare beauty that always hit her like a physical thing, the sky enormous, the land honest, the distance between things giving everything room to breathe, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been compressed for a long time. She turned on the radio. A George Strait song was playing. The Chair, that effortless, conversational masterpiece. And she turned it up and drove into the heat with the sun on her face, allowing herself, just for the length of the drive, to feel something she usually kept carefully managed. She arrived in Uvalde at 4 in the afternoon and found Bobby Dean Calloway's house without difficulty. It was a modest place, single-story, white paint going gray, a porch with 2 unmatched rocking chairs, and a wind chime that sang softly in the afternoon breeze. The lawn had been recently mowed, she noticed, and there were fresh tire tracks in the gravel driveway. Bobby answered the door before she knocked, as if he'd heard the car. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had been lived in thoroughly. Deep-set blue eyes, a jaw that needed a razor's attention, gray at his temples that had spread since the last photo she'd seen of him online. Carla Jo Reeves, he said, studying her with the frank, unsentimental assessment of a man who had spent his career listening to what people weren't saying. Bobby Dean Calloway, she replied. He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Come in. Dale's already here. Lena's due in an hour. She stepped inside and immediately understood something about the house. It was a home that was trying, quietly, and without drama, to come back to life. Dale Hutchins was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of sweet tea and an expression of profound skepticism directed at the legal pad in front of him. He was a compact, weathered man with large hands that seemed disproportionate to the rest of him. The hands of someone whose real language had always been physical, played out through strings and frets. His hair was white, cut short, and he had the particular stillness of a man who had spent decades in studios learning that unnecessary movement was a form of noise. He looked up when Carla Jo walked in and studied her with those steady brown eyes. "Your management," he said, not unkindly, just identifying. "I am," she said. "You're going to tell us George needs this by a specific date and that there are certain expectations and—" "Dale," Bobby said, setting a glass of tea in front of Carla Jo. Dale stopped talking, picked up his glass. "I'm not here to manage the creative process," Carla Jo said, settling into a chair across from him. I'm here to support it. Whatever this team needs, I'll get it. That's my job." Dale considered this. "You write?" The question caught her off guard. "Excuse me?" "You got that look," Dale said, returning his gaze to the legal pad. Same look Bobby had when he was still writing. Like you're listening for something that nobody else can hear yet. Carla Jo opened her mouth, closed it. "I work in management," she said carefully. Dale nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something he'd suspected too. Bobby was at the counter, refilling his own coffee, and she caught him glancing at her with a quick, measuring look that he redirected when their eyes met. She pulled out her phone and began reviewing her notes. Lena Whitford arrived at 5:15 in a truck that was 12 years old and had a rear bumper held on with wire that she had once meant to fix and had somehow never gotten around to. She was slight, small-boned and dark-haired, with the kind of face that was easily underestimated and revealed its intelligence slowly through the eyes, which were dark and watchful and missed very little. She shook hands with Bobby, with Dale, with Carla Jo, and stood in the kitchen with her guitar case over one shoulder and a backpack over the other, looking around the room with a careful, assessing calm that Bobby recognized as the controlled version of someone who was actually quite nervous. "Nice house," she said. "It's getting there," Bobby said. She turned to look at him directly. "Your daughter's name was Claire," she said quietly. "She was 24. I read about it. I'm sorry." The room went still. Bobby looked at her for a long moment. Dale had put his glass down. Carla Jo had stopped scrolling her phone. "Most people avoid mentioning it," Bobby said finally. "Most people are trying to make themselves comfortable," Lena said. "I thought it was more important to make you feel like you don't have to pretend she didn't exist." Bobby exhaled slowly through his nose. Something in his posture changed, barely perceptible, but Carla Jo saw it. A fraction of the weight shifting, redistributing. "Set your things down," he said. "We'll eat, and then we'll try to figure out what kind of song we're supposed to be writing." Over the next 3 days, they didn't write anything. This was not unusual, Bobby explained to Lena on the second morning when she arrived at the kitchen table with her notebook already open and her pen already moving. She had been up since 6, filling pages with fragments, half lines, chord progressions sketched in shorthand, emotional concepts circled with arrows pointing at nothing. "The first few days are about listening," Bobby said, pouring coffee. Lena looked at her pages. "I write when I'm nervous." "I know. I did too." He sat down across from her. "But you write differently when you've listened first. Trust me." Dale had spent the first 2 days in the backyard with his acoustic guitar, not playing anything that resembled a song, just running his hands over the strings in that fluid, exploratory way that looked like absent-mindedness, but was in fact something very focused. He was listening to his own hands, Carla Jo thought, watching him from the window, relearning the conversation. She had her own notebook. She kept it in her bag, and she did not take it out. On the third evening, Bobby cooked a pot of chili from a recipe that had been his mother's, and that he had not made in 2 years. They ate at the kitchen table with the windows open, the night air coming in cool and smelling of cedar and dust, and something loosened between the 4 of them. The careful professional distance that people maintain until they decide, collectively and without announcement, that it costs more than it's worth. "What's the song about?" Lena asked. She was looking at Bobby. "I don't know yet," he said. "Does George know what he wants it to be about?" Bobby turned his coffee cup in his hands. "He said he wants it to be about time, about the way time works differently as you get older, how the things you thought would hurt forever eventually become something you carry differently." He paused. He didn't say all that, but that's what I heard. Dale was quiet, turning his fork over in his hand. "My father died when I was 42, he said, to no one in particular. I thought I'd stop missing him after a while. I was wrong. You just get better at having him gone. There's a difference." The room was very quiet. Carla Jo realized, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrived when she stopped being professional for a moment, that she was sitting in the middle of something genuine. That these three people, this worn-down producer, this old guitarist, this young woman with the watchful eyes, were circling something real, something that a song could be built from. She reached into her bag. Her hand touched her notebook. She left it there. On the fourth day, Bobby found a box. He hadn't meant to. He had been looking for an extension cord in the closet of what had been Claire's room. A room he had kept closed for 2 years, opening it only when necessary and exiting as quickly as possible. And behind a stack of old recording equipment, he'd found a shoebox with Claire's handwriting on the side. Just her name, written in the looping cursive she'd had since middle school, with a small heart dotting the I. Claire. He sat down on the floor of the closet with the box in his lap and didn't open it for a long time. He could hear Dale in the backyard, the guitar beginning to find something now, a melodic fragment that kept returning, slightly different each time, as if it were searching for its own shape. He could hear Lena at the kitchen table, the soft percussion of her pen. He opened the box. Inside were things he recognized and things he didn't. A birthday card he'd given her when she turned 16. A photograph of the two of them at a Corpus Christi beach when she was 8 and he was 31, and neither of them knew yet how time would treat them. A paper napkin with a song lyric written on it in her handwriting. He read the lyric. It was 4 lines. Unfinished, clearly a beginning of something she'd meant to come back to. Claire had not been a songwriter. She'd been a teacher, a 3rd-grade teacher in San Antonio, who spent her evenings reading and her weekends hiking and her holidays driving home to see her father. But sometimes she'd written things down. Little things. Observations about life that had a natural cadence to them, the way some people think in meter without knowing it. The 4 lines were about coming home after a long time away, about the way a familiar place looks different when you've changed, and about the understanding that maybe the place hasn't changed. You've just finally gotten old enough to see it clearly. Bobby sat on the floor of the closet for 40 minutes. Then he stood up, put the box carefully on the shelf, and walked back into the kitchen. "I think I know what the song is about," he said. The working dynamic they'd established in the first week was fragile in the way of most creative arrangements, held together by mutual trust that had not yet been fully tested. Bobby ran the sessions with a loose authority, more curator than director, redirecting and shaping rather than dictating. Dale played while they talked, a continuous low accompaniment to their conversations that sometimes found something and sometimes didn't. Lena wrote constantly, her notebooks filling with verses and pre-choruses and bridges that Bobby would read and annotate in the margins. It was Carla Jo who noticed, on the 8th day, that something was wrong with Lena. She had been quieter than usual at breakfast, and Lena's usual was already quiet. So this new quiet had a different quality, the compressed, inward quality of someone managing something privately. She had written 12 pages overnight and crossed out 11 of them. When Bobby suggested a particular direction for the chorus, something about returning to a place you'd loved and finding it both exactly the same and completely changed, Lena had nodded and written for 20 minutes and then torn out the page. "What's happening?" Carla Jo asked her, finding her on the back porch in the early afternoon, looking out at the flat, sun-bleached land. Lena turned the pen over in her fingers. "I'm writing around it," she said. "Around what?" "Around the real thing." She was quiet for a moment. "I always do this. I get close to something true, and then I build a wall around it and spend all my energy decorating the wall instead of going through it. She said it without self-pity, with the clinical precision of someone who had identified a pattern in themselves and not yet figured out how to break it. Carla Jo sat down on the porch step beside her. The afternoon light was turning that particular golden amber that the Texas sky specialized in, making everything look slightly more permanent than it was. "What's the real thing?" Carla Jo asked. Lena was quiet for a long time. A hawk was circling something in the distance, patient and inevitable. "My mother left when I was 11, Lena said finally. Not dramatically, she just stopped coming home. And then she moved to Phoenix and sent Christmas cards. And I don't write about her because every time I try, it comes out either too angry or too forgiving, and neither one is honest." She turned the pen again. "But this song, the way Bobby described it, it's about carrying something, about the way time changes how you carry it. And I can't write that without going through my mother. And I can't go through my mother without writing something real. And She stopped. "I'm afraid it won't be good enough." "For the song?" Carla Jo asked. "Or for your mother?" Lena looked at her. Carla Jo held her gaze, then looked away, back at the horizon. "I'm not a songwriter," she said carefully. "But I think the things that scare you most are usually the things that are most worth writing." Lena was quiet. Then, "Do you write?" A pause. "No," Carla Jo said. Lena watched her. "Okay," she said, the same way she'd said it to Bobby on the phone, accepting the answer without entirely believing it. The conflict came on the 10th day, and it came from a direction Bobby hadn't anticipated. Dale Hutchins, who had been reliably steady through the first week and a half, the anchor of the sessions, the grounding presence, came to breakfast on the 10th morning in a state that Bobby recognized immediately and with dread. It was the particular mood of a man who had made a private decision and was now in the process of living with it. Dale didn't speak much at breakfast. He played his guitar in the backyard for an hour. Then he came back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and said to Bobby, "I need to tell you something." "All right," Bobby said. "The label that destroyed that record, the one that made me quit." Dale looked at his hands. "The A&R guy who pushed for all those changes. I heard recently that he's moved to a different label, the same label that handles Strait's newer distribution deals." He looked up. "I don't know if that's relevant, but I needed you to know it, because if I'm sitting in a room and that man walks through the door, I will leave. I want you to know that now, so you're not surprised." Bobby absorbed this. "His name?" Dale told him. Bobby knew the name. He nodded slowly. "He won't be in the room," Bobby said. "You can't promise that." "I can call Carla Jo and she can make it a condition." Dale was quiet. Then, "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "Not the project. I understand the project. Why are you doing this now? Coming back?" Bobby looked at the legal pad in front of him, at the fragment they'd been building for a week. 4 lines of a verse that had started with something from Claire's napkin and had grown slowly, carefully, into something that had bones. "Because I've been carrying it wrong," he said, "and I think writing this song might be the closest I'm going to get to putting it down." Dale looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his guitar and began to play the fragment again. And this time, something in it had shifted. It had opened slightly, like a hand releasing rather than gripping. The fight between Lena and Bobby happened on the 12th day and was, in retrospect, necessary. It began over a line. Lena had written a verse overnight that was, Bobby thought, technically brilliant and emotionally evasive. The wall decorating she'd described to Carla Jo, rendered in language so elegant that its avoidance was almost invisible. Almost. "This line," Bobby said, pointing at the legal pad, The years laid down their stones along the road. That's beautiful writing. Thank you, Lena said carefully. It's not the song. Silence. It's a beautiful line, Bobby repeated. And it's not the song. It's what you write when you're afraid to write the song. Lena's face was very still. I've been working for 12 days straight. I know. And you're telling me my writing isn't. I'm telling you your writing is extraordinary, and that you're using it to hide. Bobby's voice was steady but not gentle. He wasn't being cruel. He was being the producer, the person in the room whose job was to go toward the truth and not away from it. The song needs something that sounds like someone who got left behind, who spent years figuring out how to carry that. That's what you have, Lena. That's the whole reason you're here. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. You have no right, she began. You're right, Bobby said immediately. I'm sorry. That was too far. She stood up from the table, picked up her notebook, and walked out to the porch. Carla Jo, who had been working at the counter with her laptop, met Bobby's eyes briefly, then looked away. Dale kept playing. Soft, unhurried, as if nothing had happened. But the fragment he was playing had changed again. This time it had something in the lower register, a line underneath the melody that had a quality of mourning in it. Bobby sat at the table for a long time. Then he opened his own notebook, the one he hadn't written in for 2 years, and began to write. It was Carla Jo who went out to Lena an hour later. She brought 2 glasses of sweet tea and sat on the step without saying anything for a while. The afternoon was cooling, the sky going copper and rose at the edges, the kind of evening that made Uvalde look like a painting of itself. He wasn't wrong, Lena said eventually. Her voice was flat, wrung out. I know. That doesn't make it easier. No, Carla Jo agreed. It makes it harder. The true things usually do. Lena turned her glass in her hands. I wrote a song about my mother once, a real one, 2 years ago. I played it for my boyfriend at the time, and he said it was depressing, and that I should try to write something more commercial. She paused. I deleted the file. Carla Jo closed her eyes for a half second. I'm sorry. It was the best thing I ever wrote. Lena's voice cracked on the last word, just slightly. And I deleted it because someone told me it wasn't good enough. And now I can't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. From inside the house, barely audible, came the sound of Dale's guitar. And underneath it, the low sound of Bobby's voice, speaking rather than singing, reading something aloud to himself. What is he reading? Lena asked. Carla Jo listened. Writing, she said. He's writing. Lena was quiet. Then she opened her notebook, uncapped her pen, and began to write. Not the elegant, evasive language of the past 12 days, but something rougher, more direct. The handwriting slightly looser, less controlled. Carla Jo looked down at Lena's page just for a moment. She read 4 words before Lena's hand moved to cover them instinctively, a writer's reflex. But those 4 words were enough. They were the real thing, unguarded, painful, and alive. By the 3rd week, the house had changed. It was the same house, same cracked porch, same unmatched rocking chairs, same kitchen with the window above the sink that the afternoon light came through at an angle that made everything look slightly holy. But it felt inhabited in a way it hadn't been for 2 years. There were coffee cups in the drying rack that belonged to people who weren't Bobby. There was Lena's 2nd guitar, a battered parlor guitar she'd driven back to Corpus Christi to retrieve. Leaning against the wall by the back door, there was a yellow legal pad on every horizontal surface. There was music. The song was taking shape. It didn't have a title yet. Bobby was superstitious about titles, believing that a song told you its name when it was ready and not before. But it had a structure now, a skeleton of verse and chorus and bridge that had emerged from the combined material of all four of them over the previous 2 weeks. The verse had Lena's fingerprints on it. Conversational, specific. The kind of lyric that seemed simple until you realized it had done something very precise in a very small space. The chorus had Dale's harmonic sensibility. It didn't try to rise dramatically. It settled, the way a true thing settles, into a lower register of certainty. The bridge was Bobby's, or had started as Bobby's, and Carla Jo had suggested a single change to the second line that had caused Bobby to set down his pen and look at her with an expression that she couldn't quite interpret. "That's better," he'd said. "It just flows more naturally," she'd replied, already retreating back to her laptop. Dale had watched the exchange with those steady brown eyes and said nothing. George Strait called on a Tuesday. Bobby had been expecting the call. Carla Jo had arranged it, a check-in scheduled for the 3rd week. But when the phone actually rang and the name appeared on the screen, he sat still for a moment before answering, in the way a person steels themselves before something significant. He put the call on speaker. Lena looked up from her notebook. Dale set down his guitar. "Bobby." The voice was unmistakable. Not the performance voice, the conversational voice, which was quieter than you expected, and carried that particular Texas quality of not needing to announce itself. "George," Bobby said, "how's it going down there?" "Honest," Bobby said. "It's going honest." A pause, and in that pause, something that might have been a smile. "Good. That's what I need it to be." "We're not done," Bobby said. "But we have something." "I know you do," George said. "Carla Jo's been keeping me informed." Another pause. "I heard you brought in Dale Hutchins." "I did." "Good man, good player." A beat. "Bobby, I want to say something before you play me anything. I want you to know that I don't need this song to be perfect. I need it to be true. There's a difference." Bobby looked at the legal pad in front of him, at the 4 weeks of accumulated fragments and crossings out and rewrites. "I know the difference," he said. "I know you do. That's why I called you." A pause. "Take care of yourself down there. I'll see you when the song's ready." The call ended. The kitchen was very quiet. Lena had put her pen down. She was looking at the legal pad, at the partial lyric they'd been wrestling with for 4 days. A second verse that kept resisting completion. "He said he needs it to be true," she said softly. "He did," Bobby agreed. She picked up her pen, wrote 3 lines, looked at them, wrote a 4th. She turned the pad so Bobby could read it. He read it twice. Then he looked at her across the table. Something in his expression had changed. The carefully maintained professional composure had shifted, very slightly. And behind it was something that Carla Jo, watching from the counter, recognized as a man remembering why he'd ever cared about any of this in the first place. "That's it," he said quietly. "That's the verse." The song's near completion brought its own complications. Bobby and Lena disagreed about the bridge. Not dramatically, not the way they disagreed in week 2, with the sharp edges of people's unresolved pain colliding, but with the sustained, productive tension of 2 people who had both invested everything they had in a piece of work and had arrived at different conclusions. Bobby wanted the bridge to look backward, to acknowledge the loss explicitly, to name the thing that had been carried. Lena wanted it to look forward, toward the possibility of putting it down. "They're not mutually exclusive," Carla Jo said one evening from the couch, where she had been ostensibly reviewing emails on her laptop, but had actually been listening to the argument for 20 minutes. Both Bobby and Lena turned to look at her. "You can acknowledge the loss and still be moving towards something," she said. "The bridge doesn't have to choose. That's actually more true. You don't stop missing someone just because you start living again." Bobby was quiet. Lena was quiet. Dale played a chord from his corner. A resolution chord, the kind that doesn't end a song but signals the end of a section. "Say that again," Bobby said to Carla Jo. "Which part?" "The last part. You don't stop missing someone just because you start living again." Carla Jo felt something tighten in her chest. "I was just thinking out loud." "Say it again," Bobby repeated. And there was something in his voice, not the producer's authority, but something quieter and more personal. She said it again. Bobby wrote it down. Not as a lyric. It wasn't a lyric. It was too direct, too unsheathed for a country song, which operated in the language of the oblique, but as a compass, a true north for the bridge. That night, he wrote the bridge. He read it to the group the next morning. It was 6 lines. When he finished reading, the kitchen was very quiet for a long time. Dale was the first to speak. "Yeah," he said simply. Lena had her notebook open, but her pen was still. She was looking at the table in front of her. "It's about Claire," she said. "Not an accusation, a recognition. It's about carrying someone," Bobby said. "It's about the specific weight of someone who isn't there anymore, and the specific way you adjust your balance around that weight over time." He paused. "It's about Claire, and I think it's about your mother too. And I think it might be about some other things I don't know about." He looked at Carla Jo when he said the last part. Not pointedly, just a glance. The kind that could be deflected if needed. She deflected it. But her hand had moved to her bag, where the notebook was. "Can Dale play it?" Lena asked. Dale was already reaching for his guitar. The first time the song was played all the way through, verse, chorus, bridge, final chorus, was on a Wednesday afternoon in Bobby Dean Calloway's kitchen. With the windows open and the sound of a distant lawnmower and a mockingbird in the cedar tree outside. Dale played it through once, slowly, finding the correct tempo, the way a man finds the correct speed for a walk in unfamiliar country. Not rushed, not tentative, just right. Nobody sang. The melody was in the guitar, in the structure of the chords, and they all heard it in their own register. Bobby heard Claire's voice. He was aware of that clearly and without apology. Lena heard something she'd lost and not yet found. Carla Jo heard the gap between who she was and who she'd decided not to be. When Dale finished, he set the guitar across his knees and looked at Bobby. "It's a real song," Dale said. Bobby nodded. His jaw was tight, with the particular effort of a man who is maintaining composure, not because he doesn't feel something, but because feeling it fully right now would disable him. And there was still work to be done. "It's not finished," he said. "The second bridge transition needs work, and the opening line of the final chorus should be held differently. I want George to have room to breathe into it." "Bobby," Lena said softly. "It needs work," he repeated. "Bobby." Her voice was gentle. "It's done." The lawnmower in the distance stopped. The mockingbird kept singing. The afternoon light came through the window above the sink and fell across the legal pad on the kitchen table, across 4 weeks of accumulated truth. Bobby Dean Calloway sat down at the table, very slowly, as if setting down something heavy. "Okay," he said. "Okay." They agreed to do it right. Bobby had discussed the final presentation with Carla Jo and with George's team. No studio, not yet. First, they would bring George to the house, to the place where the song had been born, and play it for him in the room where it had lived for 5 weeks. George had agreed immediately, which had surprised no one who knew him and surprised everyone who worked in an industry that preferred conference rooms and Zoom calls to the inconvenient, necessary intimacy of small spaces and human voices. He drove himself. This was also unsurprising to those who knew him. He arrived on a Thursday morning in a truck that was not new and not ostentatious, with a single member of his team, a quiet man named Frank Dorsey, who served as both driver and, when necessary, buffer between George and the world. He stepped out of the truck into the Uvalde morning, and Bobby was on the porch to meet him. And the two men shook hands with the ease of people who have mutual respect, but not yet easy familiarity. "Nice place," George said, looking around at the flat, honest land. "It's getting there," Bobby said. Same thing he'd said to Lena 5 weeks ago. George smiled. The smile was the same as the one on every album cover. Genuine, unperformed, the expression of a man who found the world more worth smiling at than not. "I can feel it," George said. And Bobby understood that he meant the song, could feel its proximity, the way a musician who has spent 50 years listening can sometimes feel the shape of music before it's played. Inside, Lena and Dale were at the kitchen table. Dale was finishing his coffee. Lena had her notebook closed for the first time in 5 weeks, and her hands folded on top of it. Carla Jo was standing at the counter, and when George stepped into the kitchen and said her name, "Carla Jo, good to see you," she felt the professional armor that she was very good at maintaining settle into place comfortably and automatically, and beneath it, that other thing, quieter and more persistent. "George," she said, "good to see you too." George looked at Dale Hutchins across the kitchen. The two men had never worked together directly, but had been in the same industry for decades. And there was a moment of recognition between them. The recognition of two people who had both, in their respective ways, refused to let the business hollow them out. "Dale," George said. "George," Dale replied. "You look good." "I'm older than I look." "That makes two of us," Dale said. George laughed, a short, genuine sound, and sat down at the kitchen table. They didn't perform it immediately. Bobby made coffee. Lena made toast. George sat at the kitchen table and talked about Texas, about a horse he'd been having trouble with at the ranch, about the spring weather, about a song he'd heard on the radio driving down that had made him roll down the window and turn it up. He spoke about music the way people speak about something they love genuinely and have never needed to perform loving. Naturally, without effort, the way you describe a landscape you've been walking through your whole life. Lena had been quietly terrified of this moment for 5 weeks. She had told Carla Jo in one of their porch conversations during the 3rd week that the idea of George Strait in the room made her feel like she was 14 years old and had accidentally wandered onto a stage. But now, with George sitting at the kitchen table asking Dale whether the guitar was a 68 or a 69 Martin. "It was a 71, Dale said. She felt something she hadn't anticipated. Ease. Not the professional ease of someone performing competence, but the genuine ease of someone who has been let into a conversation that was already being had at the right level. "I appreciate what you've done here," George said to Bobby over coffee. "I know it wasn't a small thing. For you personally." Bobby looked at his coffee cup. "No," he said. "It wasn't. You didn't have to put your own story into it. The song needed what I had," Bobby said simply. "So that's what it got." George was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's what I hoped for." He looked around the kitchen, at the legal pads, at Lena's closed notebook, at Dale's guitar against the wall. "That's why I wanted it done this way. In a room, with people who had something real to bring." He paused. "You ready?" Bobby looked at Lena. Lena looked at Dale. Dale reached for his guitar. Dale Hutchins played the introduction. It was 8 bars, a gentle, settling thing, the kind of opening that doesn't announce itself but simply begins, the way a conversation between old friends begins, without preamble. The tempo was unhurried. The chord progression moved through a sequence that felt at once familiar and specific, like a road you know but don't see clearly until evening light falls on it at a particular angle. Bobby began to speak the lyrics. Not sing them? Not yet. George would be the one to sing them, reading them slowly, clearly, in the flat, honest voice of a man delivering something important, without dressing it up. The first verse was about coming home, not the Hollywood version of coming home, not the triumphant return, not the tearful reunion, but the quiet, particular experience of walking back into a space that holds your history and understanding for the first time what all of it was worth. The language was spare. Lena's language, shaped by Lena's discipline and Lena's pain and Lena's hard-won willingness to go through the wall instead of around it. George was listening with his hands folded on the table and his head slightly bowed, the posture of a man who was not performing attentiveness, but genuinely paying attention. The chorus arrived, and Dale let it settle rather than lift. The resolution was downward, into certainty rather than aspiration, and it held that particular emotional frequency of things that are true because they have been tested rather than hoped for. Bobby read the second verse. It was the one Lena had written in the fourth line that changed everything. The line that had made Bobby say, "That's it," and nothing else. It was about carrying someone who was gone, about the specific personal physics of that, how you adjust your body around an absence, how you learn to balance around a weight that isn't there, but never stops being the exact weight and shape of the person you lost. It was a verse that seemed almost too simple for the magnitude of what it was describing. And that simplicity was the point. The simplicity was the work of 4 weeks, and 2 lifetimes, and 1 afternoon when a woman named Lena Whitford finally went through the wall. Carla Jo was standing at the counter. She had been standing there since Dale began to play, very still, with her hands at her sides and her eyes on the middle distance. She was not performing composure. She was engaged in the genuine effort of a person who had spent years deciding that certain things were not for her. Not in her lane, not her territory, not safe, and who was now sitting in the presence of something that reached over all of those careful decisions and took hold of something she'd been keeping very still. The bridge arrived. Bobby's bridge, written after Carla Jo's words had served as compass, written in the space of 2 hours on a night when the house was quiet and the cedar trees outside were barely moving, was the emotional center of the song. It did what Carla Jo had said. It didn't choose between looking backward and moving forward. It held both, the way the human heart holds both, without resolution, without the comfort of deciding that one has replaced the other. You carry them together, the loss and the living, the gone and the going. And over time, not healing, which is too clean a word, you become more practiced at the weight, more honest with yourself about what you're carrying and why. The final chorus came with a change that Dale had suggested in the last week. A slight harmonic shift in the third bar, a minor chord where a major chord had been, that gave the resolution an honesty it hadn't had before. Not a happy ending, not a tragic ending, a true ending, which is the only kind worth having. Dale played the final notes. They hung in the kitchen air for a moment, and then they were gone. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the particular full silence of a room in which something has just happened that everyone present recognizes as real. George Strait sat at the kitchen table for a long moment, with his head still bowed and his hands still folded. Then he lifted his head. His eyes were bright. Not wet, not quite, but very close. And there was something in his expression that none of them had been prepared for. Not because it was dramatic, because it was entirely sincere. the expression of a man who has been listening for something for a long time and has just heard it. "Who wrote the second verse?" he asked. His voice was quiet and level. "She did," Bobby said, and nodded toward Lena. George looked at Lena Whitford. She met his gaze with those watchful dark eyes and held it. "That verse is going to mean something to a lot of people," George said. He wasn't flattering her. He was informing her with the authority of someone who had been making that kind of calculus for 50 years. Lena's lips pressed together. She nodded once, very carefully. "And the bridge?" George asked Bobby. "Mine," Bobby said, "with a contribution I didn't ask for." George looked at him. "A contribution you didn't ask for." "The compass for it," Bobby said. He didn't look at Carla Joe. He didn't need to. George was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Dale. "Can you play the chorus again? Just the chorus." Dale played it. George listened with his head tilted, and at the third bar, the one with Dale's harmonic shift, something moved across his face. A recognition. "Play it again," George said. Dale played it again. George Strait sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way a person does when they're hearing something internally. A voice, a tone, a shape for something. Then he looked at Bobby. "I want to sing it," he said. "That's the idea," Bobby said. George smiled. "Right now, in this room. Can we do that?" Bobby looked at Dale. Dale was already adjusting his hand position on the neck of the guitar. "We can do that," Bobby said. There was a moment in the introduction before George began to sing. 8 bars, Dale's unhurried, settling opening. The kitchen was very still. Outside, the Texas morning was going about its business. The cedar trees, the mockingbird, the particular quality of light that fell through the window above the sink. The legal pads were on the table. Lena's closed notebook was on the table. The coffee cups were on the counter. Bobby Dean Calloway was standing by the wall with his arms folded, and his eyes were slightly too bright, and his jaw was doing the thing it did when he was maintaining something. He was thinking about Claire. He was always thinking about Claire, had been for 2 years. But for the first time in 2 years, the thinking didn't arrive in the shape of a wound. It arrived in the shape of something carried, something held with care. Lena was at the table, very still, her hands in her lap. She was thinking about her mother, about the Christmas cards from Phoenix, about the 11-year-old who'd learned to sleep in a house that had become quieter than it should have been, about the deleted file. She was thinking about the song she'd deleted, and she was thinking that she would write it again, and that this time she would not delete it. She was certain of this in the way you are certain of things that have been decided in a part of yourself deeper than the part that usually makes decisions. Carla Jo Reeves was standing at the counter. Her hand was in her bag. Her fingers had found the notebook. She did not take it out, but she held it for the first time without putting it away immediately through the entire song. George Strait sang. He sang it simply, exactly as requested, exactly as needed. No performance, no production, no distance between the man and the words. Just a voice that had been honest for 50 years, that had learned over 50 years, that the most powerful thing a singer can do is get out of the way of the song and let it speak. The first verse settled into the room like morning light, quiet, certain, already there when you opened your eyes. His voice at 60-something had the particular quality of lived-in truth, the quality of a voice that has said important things in front of thousands of people and not forgotten what those things actually meant. The chorus arrived, and George held the resolution, that downward settling, that minor into certainty, and let it breathe. And in that breathing was something that made Bobby close his eyes briefly, and Dale's playing simplify further, becoming just the essential structure of the chords, making room. The second verse, Lena's verse, came, and George sang it with the care of a man who understood what he was holding. The line about carrying someone who was gone, the specific, physical weight of absence. He sang it without decoration, without the subtle emphasis that performers sometimes use to signal to an audience that this is the important part. He trusted the words. He sang them straight and let them do their work. Lena's breath caught once, barely audible. She pressed her lips together. The bridge arrived, and George Strait took it at a lower register than Bobby had imagined. Quieter, more interior, the register of a man speaking to himself rather than to a room. And at that register, the thing that Bobby had written, the thing that came from Carla Joe's compass, and Bobby's loss, and the accumulated gravity of everything that had happened in this kitchen over 5 weeks, became something different. It became something that was true about everyone who has ever carried someone who was gone. The final chorus came, and George lifted into it. Not dramatically, not the way a performance lifts, but the way a person stands up from a table they've been sitting at for a long time and finds, to their own slight surprise, that their legs hold them. The harmonic shift in the third bar arrived, and his voice moved through it with the ease of absolute mastery. And in that movement, the song completed itself. Not with a flourish, not with a declaration, but with the quiet, irrefutable weight of something that was simply, undeniably true. The last note, Dale's final chord. The kitchen was still. George Strait sat with his eyes closed for a moment after the last note faded. Then he opened them. He looked at Bobby, at Lena, at Dale, at Carla Joe. "Thank you," he said. He said it quietly, and he meant it completely. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Dale set his guitar down very gently, with the deliberate care of a man placing something valuable in a safe place. He picked up his coffee cup. He looked at Bobby with those steady brown eyes. "Still think I should have stayed retired?" Dale asked. Bobby looked at him. Something in his face had changed. The compression was gone, or most of it was gone, and beneath it was something that had been there before Claire, before the 2 years of closed rooms and cold coffee and a lawn that didn't get mowed. Something that looked like the face of a man who remembered why he had ever cared about any of this. "No," Bobby said, "I don't think that." Carla Joe left Uvalde the following morning. She said professional goodbyes. Efficient, appropriate, the kind that maintained the correct register. She shook hands with Dale, who held her hand a half-second longer than necessary, and looked at her in that way he had of looking at people, with those steady eyes that saw the gap between what you were saying and what was true. "You should take the notebook with you when you go back to Nashville," he said. She looked at him. "The one in the bag," he said. She didn't answer that. She thanked him for his work. And he nodded, and she walked to her car. She said goodbye to Lena, who hugged her. Unexpectedly, unself-consciously, the hug of someone who has been through something real with another person and doesn't see the point of pretending otherwise. "Come to Corpus when the song comes out," Lena said into her shoulder. "I'm going to play a show, a real one. I've decided. I'll be there," Carla Joe said. She meant it. Bobby walked her to the car. They stood beside it for a moment in the Uvalde morning. The mockingbird was in the cedar tree again, or a mockingbird that looked exactly like it. "You saved the bridge," Bobby said. "I made a suggestion," Carla Joe said. "In music, those are the same thing." He looked at her steadily. "You know that." She looked at the car, at the door handle, at the horizon. "I work in management," she said. "You do," he agreed. And then, but the notebook goes with you. She got in the car. She drove north out of Uvalde with the windows down and the radio off. And 20 minutes outside of town, in the flat, honest openness of the Texas plain, she reached into her bag on the passenger seat and took out the notebook. She set it on the dashboard, in the sun. She didn't open it. Not yet, but she left it there, visible in the light, for the rest of the drive. The song was recorded 6 weeks later in a studio in San Antonio. Dale played the guitar. The production was spare, almost skeletal. 2 guitars, a light-brushed drum beat, a single cello in the bridge that had been Bobby's idea and that George had approved with one listen. Bobby produced it from the room, not the booth, standing on the studio floor beside Dale, close to the sound. The way he'd produced records in the early years before the glass and the technology had increased the distance between the maker and the music. When they played back the final take, nobody in the room spoke for a long moment. The engineer, a young man named Trevor Nolan, who had been professional and quiet throughout the session, sat at the console with his hands in his lap and his eyes slightly too bright. "Is that?" he started. "Yes," Bobby said. "That's a..." Trevor stopped. "Yes," Bobby said again. George Strait was standing in the center of the studio floor with his hands at his sides, listening to his own voice come back to him through the monitors. He stood that way through the entire playback. The verse, the chorus, the verse, the bridge, the final chorus. And when the last chord faded and the room went quiet, he turned to Bobby. "That's the one," he said simply. Bobby nodded. His throat was tight. He had been a producer for 30 years. He had been in rooms when good songs were finished. He knew the feeling. He had not felt it in 2 years. And he had been unsure for a long time whether he would feel it again. He felt it now. The song released on a Tuesday in late spring, and it did what George Strait had told Lena it would do. It meant something to people. Not in the way of a hit, not immediately, not in the metrics and streaming way that the modern industry measured meaning, but in the particular, old-fashioned way of a song that found its people. Truck drivers in West Texas, who turned it up and didn't say anything to the person in the passenger seat. Mothers in Kitchen, in Louisiana, who went very still when it came on the radio. Old men at diners in rural Oklahoma who stared at their coffee cups and thought about people they had carried for a long time. The line from the second verse, Lena's line, was the one that people quoted. Put it on social media, on handwritten notes slid under friends' doors, in text messages sent at 2 a.m. to siblings they hadn't called in too long. Lena Whitford played her first real show in Corpus Christi 4 months after the release, in a venue that held 300 people and sold out in 11 minutes. Carla Jo was there, in the 4th row, with the notebook in her bag. She had been writing in it again, slowly, carefully, with the particular discipline of someone learning to trust what their own hands knew how to do. Dale Hutchins drove back to his ranch in Uvalde and told Pauline about it over dinner. And Pauline said she'd known he wouldn't stay retired. And Dale said she was right. And she said she usually was. And Dale agreed with that too. He played guitar in the evenings on the back porch, and sometimes what he played was the song, and sometimes it was something new. And either way, the horses in the far paddock seemed to listen. Bobby Dean Calloway sat on his front porch one evening in late summer, a mug of coffee in his hand. Hot this time, fresh, and the lawn recently mowed, and the porch light on. The mockingbird was somewhere in the cedar trees, invisible but audible, cycling through its extraordinary repertoire of other birds' voices. He had opened Claire's room, not cleared it. He wasn't ready for that, and maybe he wouldn't be for a long time, and that was all right, but opened it. The shoebox was on the shelf where he'd left it, her name in her looping cursive, the small heart dotting the I. He left the door open when he went to bed. The napkin with her 4 lines was on his writing desk now, in a small frame he'd found in a drawer. He read it sometimes in the morning, with his first coffee. The way you return to something true, not because you need to be reminded of it, but because the returning itself is a form of keeping faith. He had not stopped carrying her, but he had gotten better at how he carried her. More honest about the weight, more deliberate in the balance. There was a legal pad on the kitchen table, a new one, first page still blank, and a pen that had fresh ink in it. He wasn't ready to write yet, but he had left the pad there, visible, in the morning light. For the first time in 2 years, that felt like enough. George Strait played the song live for the first time at a small benefit concert in San Antonio. An intimate venue, 1,200 seats, nothing like the stadium shows that had defined his career at its peak. He introduced it simply, without the elaborate backstory that publicists usually preferred. "I asked some people in Texas to write me something honest," he said, standing at the microphone with his guitar and the easy, unhurried authority of a man who had been doing this for 50 years and had never once forgotten why. They did. This is what they gave me. He played it alone, with just his guitar, no band, no production, the way the song had first been heard, in a kitchen in Uvalde, with the windows open and a mockingbird outside. The room went quiet. Not the polite, attentive quiet of a concert audience waiting for a familiar song. The other kind, the kind that happens when 1,200 people simultaneously recognize something as true. When a song reaches into the specific private interior of each person in the room and finds, to everyone's slight surprise, that it has been there all along, waiting for someone to name it. By the second verse, no one was moving. By the bridge, the man in the 7th row, a retired schoolteacher from Seguin named Howard Bledsoe, who had lost his wife of 38 years the previous winter and had come to the concert because his daughter had insisted, and he had run out of reasons to say no, had put his face in his hands. He was not the only one. By the time the final chorus arrived and George Strait's voice moved through that harmonic shift in the 3rd bar, that minor chord where a major chord had been, Dale's suggestion, the honesty that a happy ending couldn't provide. The silence in the room had become a physical thing, a shared atmosphere, the kind of collective presence that happens when art and truth arrive at the same address at the same time. The last note. George stood at the microphone for a moment after it faded, the way he had stood in Bobby's kitchen, head slightly bowed, hands at his side. Then he looked up at 1,200 people. The applause, when it came, was different from ordinary applause. Not louder, slower to start, actually, because people were reluctant to break what had just existed in the room. But when it built, it had a quality, a sustained, rising quality, that the sound engineer at the back of the room, a 25-year veteran named Cody Brower, who had worked 400 live shows and heard every possible crowd response, would describe to his wife later that evening as the most sincere thing he'd witnessed in a venue in his professional life. It was like the whole room was saying thank you, he told her. She asked what the song was called. He thought about it for a moment. He hadn't caught the title from the stage. Something about time, he said. About how you carry people. He paused. About how you don't stop. Bobby Dean Calloway went back to producing. Slowly, selectively, on his own terms. No more than 2 projects a year. Always from Texas. Always with people who had something real to bring. His name began appearing again in liner notes, and the musicians who worked with him described him in interviews with variations of the same phrase. He makes you feel like the truth is worth the trouble. Lena Whitford released her first full album 14 months after the song. It included, as the fifth track, a song about her mother, not the deleted one, which was gone for good, but a new one, built from the same source material, older and more honest than the deleted version would have been. The reviews were thoughtful, serious, the kind that recognized something genuine without fully knowing what to do with it. She didn't chart. She built an audience that came to her shows and stood close to the stage and listened the way people listen when they're not just enjoying something, but needing it. She considered this the better outcome. Dale Hutchins did not retire again. He played on 3 more records over the following 2 years, all produced by Bobby, all made in Texas, all with the deliberate, necessary slowness of people trying to get something right. He and Pauline took a trip to the Texas coast in the fall, and he played guitar on the beach at sunset, while she read in a folding chair. And neither of them felt the need to say anything about it. Carla Jo Reeves worked in management for another 8 months before handing in her resignation. It was not a dramatic departure. No confrontation, no crisis, no single moment of revelation. It was the quiet, unhurried decision of a person who had been listening for something for a long time and had finally heard it clearly enough to act on. She spent the following spring writing, slowly and carefully, in the notebook that she had kept in her bag for 6 years and had finally begun to open. Her first song, written over 4 days in March, in her Nashville apartment with the windows open and the neighborhood sounds coming in, and the particular morning light that fell across her kitchen table at an angle that reminded her, every time, of Uvalde, was about the gap between who you are and who you decided not to be, about the cost of that decision, about what happens when you finally stop paying it. She sent it to Lena first, in a voice memo recorded on her phone without any introduction or context. Lena's reply was 3 words: "This is real." Carla Jo read those 3 words at her kitchen table and held them for a long time, the same way you hold a key before putting it in a lock, measuring its weight, deciding you're ready. Then she opened a new page in the notebook and began again. In the end, they had only been asked for a simple song. They had given what they had, which was more than simple and more than a song. They had given what the years had made of them, the loss and the living, the weight and the balance, the going and the gone. And George Strait had stood in a kitchen in Uvalde, Texas, and a studio in San Antonio, and a venue of 1,200 people, and sung it straight. And time, for a few minutes, had stood still. Not because the song had stopped it, because the song had finally said what time had been building toward all along.